Exodus, you begin to see what was taking place. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for over 400 years. No freedom. No day off. You worked 7 days a week, sun up to sundown. You were a threat to the Egyptian culture. So because of your threat, because you were becoming so populous, they start killing your children. All the male babies were being killed. Except one, who would raise up to be God's chosen to lead his people out of Israel. For over 400 years they're crying out, God, save us. God, we can't take this anymore. Do you hear us? Have you given up on us? Lord, hear our cry. For 400 years, they cry out to God. And God raises up Moses. God says, I hear your cry. I hear the cries of the oppressed. I hear the cries of the brokenhearted. I hear the cries of the captive. And I have come to set you free. And so God, with Moses as his human instrument, sets his plan in motion to set the Israelites free. Plague after plague comes upon the Egyptians. Each time Pharaoh is given an opportunity, let my people go. But he refuses. 9 plagues come and go. And now the last. Pharaoh, you've had your chance. Now tonight it's going to cost you. And the Israelites were prepared. They were told to, each family was to go out and to select a perfect lamb. And they were to kill that lamb. They were to roast that lamb. And they were to take the blood of that lamb and they were to wipe it on the door frame and the head post of the door. One of the things we learned Thursday night in regards to the Passover, that as they did that, they were forming a cross. Because there was going to come a time in the night where the angel was going to pass over the land of Egypt. And whatever house was covered by the blood of that lamb, the angel would pass over. And death would not come upon that household. But upon Pharaoh and the rest of the Egyptian households, there was a weeping and wailing like had never been heard before. And finally, the phrase that they had been longing to hear was finally uttered by Pharaoh. Go! Leave! Get out of here! And so they leave. But they are instructed to remember this day. To celebrate it. Because this is the day that your God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has come and delivered you and set you free. And so they gather together for the Passover, the Seder, to remember. But as we head into this week, for those that were living there in the first century, there's a lot going on. Because again, they are no longer free. In fact, Israel in their history had only experienced about 80 years of freedom, where they were autonomous. Outside of that, they were captives to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks. And now it's the Romans. And every year they celebrate Passover, looking back to when they were delivered and set free from Egypt, and they're celebrating Passover each year July 4th, 1776, when brave men committed high treason and signed the Declaration of Independence, declaring our freedom from the tyranny of British rule. Now imagine what we would feel like if our nation was occupied by an outside force. What would the 4th of July be like? Be kind of subdued. We would still remember it. We would look back to when freedom was first gained. But we would be looking ahead to the day when we would finally regain our freedom again. And that's the Israelites at Passover. We were freed once from captivity. We're under captivity again. Oh Lord, hear our cry. Set us free again. And in this particular week, the atmosphere has changed. It's not Moses that's walking around this time, it's Jesus. And by now, word has spread. They know, they've seen, they've heard. There's something different about this man. He heals diseases. The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk again. They've seen him exercise his power and authority over demons. People being delivered. And there begins to be this stirring in their hearts. Is this the one? Is this the one who's come to deliver us again from oppression and to set us free again? They're thinking politically. They're thinking revolution. It's come. It's time. So as Jesus rode into Jerusalem on that donkey on that day, on this day that we refer to as Palm Sunday, and they're waving their palm branches, which was kind of their national symbol. Have some palms here. They're taking them, waving them. Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna. But they might as well have been saying something different on that day. Really, what their heart cry was saying was revolution. We're coming to be set free politically. Finally, our king, our physical king, is going to establish rule. The Romans are going to get kicked out. That's what they're saying on that day. That's why if you've ever wondered what changed from Sunday to Friday, that they would go from saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, to saying, crucify him. It's because they were wanting a revolution. They were wanting something different. That's why their hearts could so quickly change from Sunday to Friday. Because Jesus did come to bring a revolution, but it wasn't the revolution that they were looking for. And see, and the Romans, they knew. They would hear the rumblings going on amongst the Israelites. And on this particular Passover, Rome had brought in an extra 4,500 soldiers. There was kind of this stirring going on like, these people are planning to overthrow us. They're going to attempt a military coup. So we better show up in force. And so they set up. They're prepared. And even the disciples were looking forward to this. We talked a little bit about this last week. They had been arguing amongst themselves who's going to be the greatest, who's going to sit on the right and the left hand of Jesus Christ as he establishes his throne and his kingdom there. That's what they were looking forward to as well. But Jesus is about to turn this all on its head. Turn in your Bibles to John chapter 13, verses 1 through 27. We looked at the first part of John chapter 13 last week. We're going to build upon this, and we're going to look through the rest of it. So John chapter 13, verses 1 through 27. We read this. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him, therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. Most assuredly I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit, and testified and said, most assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. By the way, that's John's way of addressing himself. Whenever you read that in the book of John, it's John referring to himself. The one whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask who it was of whom he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. We have here the Last Supper. In fact, I'm going to show an image up on the screen here. It's the image that we typically look to as, this is what we think of when we think of the Last Supper. You know who painted this? Leonardo da Vinci. But I've kind of alluded to this before, and it was mentioned again on Thursday night. Leonardo da Vinci, he got it all wrong. There actually isn't a thing correct about this painting, and yet it's what comes to our mind when we think of the Last Supper. First of all, notice in the background, it's daylight. Passover begins at 6 p.m. Begins at night, and it lasts 4 hours. So it's a long meal, because they're sharing the scriptures. They're sharing what they remember. All the stories have been, and they're remembering what God did during that first Passover. So 4 hours. By the time it's done at 10 o'clock, it's dark out. So it's not light. Also, we have Jesus in the middle of the table, and we're going to see in just a moment that at that time and culture, that's not where the host would be seated at. Thirdly, we also see, look at the faces of the men up there. How old do you think they are, based on what they look? 40s, 50s, 60s? They look like older men. And yet we know from history that Jesus' disciples were not that old. They were teenage young men, 17 to 19 years of age. Peter was probably the oldest of the disciples. He was married, was a businessman, was probably in his early to mid-20s, but he was the oldest. So he looked even younger than me. And I don't look that young. But not only that, not only do they look older, but they also look surprisingly white. They're Italian looking, as was pointed out Thursday night. His disciples were all from Israel. They would have been a little bit darker in their complexion, a little bit more olive colored to their skin. And what was pointed out on Thursday night by our guest is that of the 13 faces depicted up there, there's only one that has a more Jewish-looking appearance. And this I found kind of sad. That the one that is portrayed looking more like a Jew is Judas Iscariot. Doesn't that speak a little bit to how our culture, how some in our culture feel towards the Jewish society and the Jewish people? So their ages, their skin color, it's all wrong. The table itself is wrong. It wouldn't have been that elevated. They didn't sit at chairs and eat a meal. And even the food is... if you have that picture, I don't know about you, I wouldn't even have that picture because there's nothing accurate about it. They weren't eating fish and bread. They were having unleavened bread. Cups of wine. There would have been some communal food around they would have partaken in. In fact, to help give you an understanding, I need 13 volunteers. I don't know if we have 13 men here at all or not. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Parker. 12. Okay, I just need 13 volunteers. I don't care. Male, female, just come on up. I need 13 volunteers. So, quickly. Top. Come on. So, yeah, come on up. And what you're going to do is in that culture, you ate with your hands. You ate with your right hand, not your left. So you're going to lay on your left hip and shoulder like this, okay? So go ahead and position yourselves around here. You're going to get a little comfortable. Do we have 13? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Come on, I need 5 more. Come on. Come on. Parker, you want to come on up? No? All right. We're getting there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I need 3 more. Come on. Don't be shy. This is good. No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. No, we needed you, Amy. You're 13. You're lucky 13. So go ahead, wherever you want to fit in. You want to get over there by Dave if you want? Sure. All right. And it's a good thing that you all are seated on the outside because this is where the food would have been, so you wouldn't have wanted to put your feet in the food. Now, in their culture, the host, the picture there has Jesus in the middle. But at that time, the host would actually have been seated right here. Second in on this particular side of the table. Now, keep in mind, do not pay attention to the fact that it's Heidi and that it's female. By no means are we crossing that line. You have to use your imagination. These are all men up here, okay? But this is where the host would have been seated. To the host's right would have been their right-hand man, would have been right here. Who do you think would be the right-hand man of Jesus? John. Because when we look at the passage, when it came to that time as to find out who was going to betray, John leaned back into Jesus and said, "Who is it?" But notice, as they're seated around the table, their order goes from most important to least important. So the further you got down around this side of the table, you were less important. Now, there comes a point in the passage where, here, I'll move this out of the way so I get unhindered view here. Jesus has just said that one of you is going to betray me. Now someone motions to John and says, "Hey, find out who it is." Do you remember who that was? Who motioned, who was trying to get a hold of John's attention?
Simon Peter.
It was Peter. Peter, the one that actually, if we were to picture who would be Jesus' right-hand man, we would picture Peter. We have the imagery of Peter from after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Peter being the one being told, "Upon this rock I will build my church." Now, there's John. He's seated like that. Who is going to be able to have good line of sight with John to be able to say, "Hey"? But right here, Peter placed in the position of the least important at the table. In fact, now all of a sudden you have a new perspective as far as the whole foot washing that took place. Peter, who raised his objections. "You can't wash my feet." Peter was in the position where he was the one that was supposed to be washing the feet. He was in the position of least importance. But he's the one who's going, "Hey, psst, who is it?" And John leans back to Jesus and says, "Who is it that's going to betray you?" And Jesus says, "It's the one whom I'm going to dip this piece of bread and give to." Now, think about where Jesus is positioned. Right here, second in on the right. Jesus clearly isn't going to give it to John. Who's going to be the one that is closest to Jesus to be able to give the bread to? Because usually they would kind of be in groupings of three. So we have John, Jesus, Judas. Sorry, Joe, you're Judas here. But there's something else about this position. This position right here to the left of the host was the guest of honor. The most important guest of them all. And it is Judas himself, the one who would betray Jesus. And yet Jesus, in an act of love, not only had washed Judas' feet, but then also dips the bread and hands it to him, as if to say, "Judas, I love you. Here's one more opportunity to back out. You don't have to do this." But what happens? Judas takes the bread, and at that point, Satan comes into him. Thank you, volunteers. You may go back to your seats, but thank you for helping with this visual. Does anyone need a hand up? Got it? Use the cushions. that you got an idea there of what was taking place. There was so much that was going on in this final meal. And again, the people's heart cry was revolution, change, new government, new leadership. Jesus, it's got to be you. And Jesus at this meal, he's already turned everything upside down. By this point, even if nothing else happened, it's already been turned on its head. He washed their feet. But Jesus came to start a different revolution. Because Jesus was pointing out to them that there is a captivity that is worse than Egypt or Babylon or Rome. There's something that you need to be set free from that is greater and more oppressive than any foreign government that you've ever experienced. He's telling them the problem with the world is not the government. The problem is your heart. And that right now you are being oppressed by sin. It is sin that holds us captive and separates us from God. So Jesus was saying there's a captivity that's far, far worse. He goes, and I've come to bring freedom to the captives. I've heard your heart cry. You might be crying for physical revolution, but your heart is crying something else. And in that moment, he is showing that there is a narrow way of defining salvation. That salvation would be in no other name than the name of Jesus. Secondly, we see here from John that there was a power to be overthrown that called for surrender and obedience rather than revolt. I told you Jesus was going to turn things on his head. The way that they all envisioned this going down was all of a sudden there was going to be this armed uprising. Revolt. We're going to stand up against Rome. We're finally going to knock them out. But Jesus said that the way to overthrow this oppressor that you have, it's not through revolt. It's going to be through surrender and obedience. Jesus, after the meal, would then go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And here we would hear Jesus cry out to the Father, Father, not my will, but yours be done. Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. We see Jesus surrendering to the will of the Father and being obedient to it no matter what, because he knew that through his surrender and obedience, that is what was going to break the power of sin. That the only way to set the people free from that oppressor of sin was that he needed to surrender and obey. Thirdly, we see that there was a battle to be won that required revolutionary love rather than revolutionary violence. Throughout the book of John, love is a constant theme throughout his book. But in the first 12 chapters, John uses the word for love, agape. He uses that word 12 times in the first 12 chapters. But from chapter 13 through chapter 17, all of a sudden he uses that word for agape love 31 times. Love was the driving force. It's been displayed already. Last week when we talked about Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, it was an act of love. That it was a love without limits. There wasn't any length that God would go to show his love to people, to mankind. Jesus was showing his desperate love for human beings, and that he will do whatever it takes to redeem the lost, to set the captives free. Love, service, and sacrifice would now become the hallmarks of this new kingdom. It wasn't going to be about political might or a powerful army. Love, service, sacrifice. kind of what we're going to be talking about after church as we talk about serving our community. Fourthly, we see here that Jesus would be the new Adam. That Jesus was going to live a human life and avoid the rebellion of every human up to this point. Where did sin enter into the world? It was through Adam. Adam and Eve, as they looked at that fruit and they took it and ate of it. Jesus was now coming back as a new Adam. John in John chapter 1 recreates Genesis chapter 1. He's recreating creation in that moment. It's a brand new creation story. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And He shined His light into a dark world, but the world did not receive Him. Here's this recreation of the beginning, but now it's Jesus that's coming. Jesus who would no longer give in to the temptation set before Him. Adam and Eve failed when tempted. They tried to take control. They wanted to be like God. Jesus, when He was tempted, chose dependence and surrender to God the Father. Jesus would recapture our vocation of witness and worship. That we were once again to be the image bearers of God, and we are to worship Him. Fifthly, we see here that Jesus would be the new Moses. That He would lead the people out of bondage and into a promised land. There is so much that's going on. To really understand what is taking place from Matthew clear on into Revelation, we've got to go back to the Old Testament. There is so much that is there. That is now, they say the new is in the old concealed, the old is in the new revealed. Moses, 40 years in the desert. Jesus, 40 days. Moses leads them out of Egypt. Jesus himself, at the age of 2, he and his family went down to Egypt and then would come out of Egypt to come back to Israel to set the people free. Moses led 12 tribes. Jesus led 12 disciples. Moses could only get the people to a geographical point, a place on a map. Jesus came to bring us back to a place where we can re-engage with God. And that communion and fellowship is restored. That right relationship, that bridge has been built. And we can now reconnect with God in a way that wasn't possible before. God